Well, here is a picture of Ron Walker, after whom this particular lecture is named. And giving the inaugural Walker Lecture today is Daniel Fattorini, who is a director of Transact. And he's going to be talking to us today about changes in the business model and the way things are presented. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dan.
Thank you very much. And I must initially say I'm very pleased to be presenting such a lovely environment. I happened to take a little look at the history of Coombe Abbey, and it was the home of a former home of a silent monastic order who had limited contact with the outside world. So I thought it was a little bit of a paradox for the sound and communications engineers, but they did make some very significant technological advancements in production and management techniques. So hopefully we can follow in their footsteps working today. I intended today's presentation really as a large overview as to how many products and services within our industry are consolidating, digitizing, and potentially moving to software or cloud-based systems and license models. And I also wanted to bring into that a little bit of futurism, looking ahead at what might look to expect in the coming years, and look at the art of the possible when it comes to the unstoppable march of technology. So as a sort of a personal introduction, introduction to today, further introduction to today's speech. So going to look at how digital technologies have been introduced, what challenges they've brought since superseding analog systems, and how we've overcome them so far. And then potentially how cloud services are now taking those systems to a new level, bringing some of the processing that we're doing outside of our customers' buildings, and potentially what elements of the work that we delivered can be delivered as a service. So, by way of an introduction to the talk and also to some of where I'm coming from, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own career, my own history. I started my career in the late 90s, early 2000s, working in recording studio design and build. And one of the main reasons I moved into the more professional audiovisual field was because literally over the span of 3 or 4 years, I went from not creating this specific room, but rooms with lots of boxes and knobs and synthesizers, and all sorts of wires and patch bays, which were very quickly superseded by something like this. The rapid digitization of elements such as plugins and virtual instruments effectively created a hole in the industry I was working in, and I decided to move elsewhere to fulfill pastures new, and moving into the professional AV world. I guess in that period, 15 years or so ago, we weren't all responsible for racks like this, but many of the professional audio products went from a sort of rack of 15, 20 U devices, and lots of cables onto something fitting in 1 U and providing a lot of the same functions. And I'm not saying this is 100% of the time, but in particular, the digital signal processing has had an awful lot of influence in a shrinking footprint. But thankfully, there wasn't that many people who knew how to set them up well. So whereas recording studio owners were quite good at running their plugins. And then looking to today, I see a similar picture emerging. We are moving not totally, but partially beyond the realms of the oodles by oodles 42U high matrix switcher, and consolidating our video transit and traffic onto simple network-based systems with AV over IP. The sheer scale and task and bandwidth of digitizing video has obviously been much greater than audio because of the much higher data rates, and it's only recently with the availability of fast backplane network switches and 10 gig uplinks and things like that that we've been able to overcome this. But I feel that this is an inevitable path that we're moving towards. So yes, the combination of digitization, increased processing speed, and this shrinking footprint has been an ongoing march, and I think it's inevitable that it will continue to do so. It's led to a lot of positives when it comes to quality, when it comes to speed of installation, but it has also meant that people need to learn quickly and rapidly and stay up to date. I've always personally believed that the majority of your technical knowledge, if you work in professional AV, needs to be refreshed on something like a 5-year cycle. I think it's probably, some people may say slightly more, some may say slightly less, but there's a definite need for us as individuals to keep on learning, and I think it's one of the reasons many of us stay within this profession. Yeah, just a few examples of technologies that are close to being redundant or moving. So one, I think that's almost an absolute definite: video conferencing, multi-point controllers, bridging devices, now just absolute de facto delivered by Teams and by Zoom. And these devices, when I was working 10 years ago, would be, well over £100,000, and now it's just something you get for your 10 quid a month license fee. Not entirely removed, but individual audio processors are something that have gone by the wayside. And one of my absolute personal favourites was the obligatory DVD VCR combo that was in every corporate boardroom, never used, but still took a programmer weeks and weeks to learn the infrared codes for. Some things, though, thankfully, and this is very, very fundamental, some things will never change. So first of all, the laws of physics, as many of us do try and drill into our customers. No matter how much you might spend on the fanciest and most expensive gizmo, it doesn't have some built-in Star Trek technology that can do zoom warps and things like that. The nature of human perception. So psychoacoustics, our ability to, our sight, the impossibility of picking people up in a meeting room with 3 open windows, a loud aircon unit, and someone banging on a coffee cup. And yes, so until we reach the next stage of our evolution, I think we'll be imperfect beings when it comes to our perception. And the final one for me is just the fact that the client always wants it cheaper, and furniture vendors are always late on every single project ever. Software as a service is most... I was going to do my ChatGPT definition today, but I didn't quite get time to deliver it. But software as a service is normally described as cloud-delivered technologies. I am going to touch on cloud services today, but I'm also looking at areas where we're moving from dedicated hardware-based platforms to software that can run standalone on local servers. So the kings of the moment, I guess, in that front would be, first of all, conferencing. It's kind of hard to think that Zoom and Microsoft Teams have only really been viable platforms for about 5 or 6 years in terms of their them being functional and working well, and yet they are absolute parts of everyday life within business nowadays. The ability to have 100 people on a call 10 years ago was exclusively only available for high-end enterprise clients with data centers that could take multiple incoming connections. And now it's just a standard thing that any SME, even individuals who pay their 365 license, can deliver. And COVID-19 was probably the single biggest growth factor for UC SaaS products. But actually, I think if you look back to 2008, the 2008 crash was the point for me that saw the biggest boom in video conferencing, when travel budgets were slashed. Large organisations wanted to reduce the number of first-class trips from London to New York, and actually, particularly the video conferencing industry had a pretty good time, whilst others faltered. However, there are different sales models within all of these platforms. One that I think is probably one of the least friendly to our industry is Zoom, because they tend to be selling direct to end clients. We generally prefer products where we can add value, we can integrate. However, where clients require these things, they're something of a necessary, not going to say the E word, but anyway. Microsoft Teams is an incredibly popular standard, largely by virtue of the fact that people are buying it anyway. Anyone with an Office 365 license is getting Microsoft Teams. So it is hugely popular. There are other platforms, of course. I think it's well worth mentioning WebEx by Cisco, which came from pretty much a different direction, which was a hardware manufacturer developing a software product to work with their hardware platforms and with their enterprise management systems. Digital signage, I would say, is the next current product that has almost exclusively moved over to a cloud-based model. And I guess there's no surprise in that when ultimately you're looking at something pretty similar to a web page and managing something pretty similar to a web page. And a favourite of mine, but I think one that is very underused and undersold, is our device management platforms. Our clients generally want the things that are in the room and that do the job and that they see and that works immediately. However, there are some absolutely fantastic device management platforms out there that I know of organisations who are actually including them for free as part of maintenance deals, because it makes the job of actually maintaining the system easier for the integrator. So it's actually a win-win for both sides. And of course, cloud IoT management go together well together. And then the hybrid side would be on-premise AV service systems, as I will call them. The likes of Intel, AMD, HP, manufacturers like that produce dozens of new models and new chips and faster memory and motherboards and quicker solutions. And there is no way that smaller, bespoke, specialist manufacturers can keep up with the sort of process and development that a PC manufacturer can do. So now we are beginning to see, two examples here being Crestron Virtual Control, Shure Intelemix Room. There are many others as well, which are licensed products that can sit on a fairly standard PC and deliver the processing of a relatively expensive device. There's the side, I guess, that if if most devices can be controlled via LAN, if most audio devices can sit on AES-67 or Dante, then ultimately, why do you need much more than 1 or 2 network interface cards? I think, personally, I think now that some manufacturers have started, the genie is kind of out of the bottle, and I think we'll see more manufacturers following suit, because ultimately the cost and the cost model are very, very effective. Which brings a little bit of futurism from my side, but there are people working towards this, and I think we have on the horizon the potential for the single box room system, because there's no reason why we couldn't now look at having a NUC PC, fairly standard device, which is delivering all of our audio processing, connected to a touch panel, controlling all of our devices, running a separate piece of software, connected to AV over IP systems, managing video and USB switching, and of course, as they do so well already, hosting all of our calling. And a system like that could be re-imaged. Even if that one device failed, they could be replaced quite quickly. And that size and small footprint and lack of requirement for racks and other devices like that are, is a very popular prospect. But what's the challenge then if we can have this hypothetical all-in-one PC or Android device or Linux Ubuntu device? If that's a tangible dream, what is the challenge in us leaving the building and actually hosting this in the cloud? Because ultimately the cloud is simply another person's PC sitting somewhere else in the world. And I guess the first challenge is that our device sits on its own and can sit on its own kind of local area network, and that doesn't introduce much of a delay or communication problem. I would hope my corporate clients would have more than a D-Link for 8-port switch, but it fit well in the presentation. So, and then going through sort of routing and firewall and an ISP, and then all the way through to a cloud data center, and not forgetting within that process it has to go all the way back again. So these challenges of actually moving services to the cloud can be summarized, I guess, as speed, location, so where exactly is that data center, which we'll come on to a little bit later, some of the issues that might happen. Security, if you're sending information out on the public web, how secure is it, and how reliable that is. So starting with latency, it's an absolute fundamental roadblock in terms of services. I think those of you at Jamie Angus's talk earlier, obviously looking at frame by frame encoding and the absolute speed required to deliver effective situations. Now, the average Zoom call is around 150 milliseconds latency from the person talking to the person receiving, but you're not in the same room, so that perception doesn't necessarily cause a problem. Whereas I think the average Dante device latency is somewhere around 1 millisecond, which is oodles of difference in terms of speed. So certain technologies are going to be more appropriate. So looking at some real world latency figures, I will give you a zoom on this slide earlier, but AWS have a nice little feature where you can track exactly the latency to their data centers. So I think it shows London, North Virginia and the UAE. And we were looking at under 70 milliseconds, and bearing in mind that was on home Wi-Fi on a domestic connection, so probably significantly less than that. Whereas to data centers abroad, you can be doubling or tripling that speed. So the implications of latency, as I said, are very much dependent upon the application. So remote communications already working and working absolutely fine with that kind of latency issues. Live sound, I think, for anything but quite significant time frames away, I think there's virtually no possibility that those services can be delivered there. System control, however, I think is more realistic. If we have, I mean, there are already domestic control systems for light switches and things like that, which are running on cloud servers, and there are already manufacturers who are producing control systems which can sit in a client's own data center. Therefore, if that was a cloud data center, it's not necessarily an issue. Now, areas like video processing, when I say video processing, I guess you can have to think about whether that be live or not. One of the huge advantages of cloud is the ability to scale and take advantage of an enormous amount of processing power and pay for the amount of time that you're using it, rather than investing in an enormous supercomputer type machine and having that active at all times. So if you are looking at broadcast scenarios or editing scenarios, being able to leverage that is a huge advantage. And actually, personally, within my own work, we're moving to virtual machines running BIM modeling PCs within AWS, rather than actually having the actual machines sitting in the office. And it works out probably less than half the price to be having that capacity. Device management, as I said, pretty much already there and delivering that. And then media distribution, an obvious one. We're distributing to YouTube today, so all that is already in place. So yes, there's just a marginally bigger font size to see. But it's also critical to look at how variable the latency can be from your device to a data center. Now these are dependent, I won't go with the time available, I won't go too deep into the technical, but they are dependent upon protocol. So those were TCP communications. Now, I'm sure a lot of people in here know the difference in TCP and UDP, but TCP is a protocol that is like a very nice receptionist that greets you and checks you've heard them correctly, and ensures everything's ordered and the message was received and everything's secure and possible. Whereas UDP, which is generally used for video streaming, is kind of like a very drunk person at a bar who's shouting at you, doesn't care if you listen, and is getting quite a few of the words in the wrong way around, and often doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But it is much faster, and it's potentially less secure, but it's not insecure by any stretch of the imagination. I think it is very, as I said before, I think the latency factor is probably one of the biggest determining factors in what will go to what will become cloud-based and what won't. So live sound, video manipulation, video switching, probably out of the question for the current period, whereas device control, broadcast, conferencing, workplace management are very much within the realm. One area that I think is really important for anyone who is potentially delivering cloud services, and it's not an obvious thing, some of you may be aware, but it's not an obvious thing to know, is regionality with cloud servers. Cloud is an abstract term, so we think of people just talk about it as a cloud server. It's just kind of out there in the ether. But in reality, there's data sitting in a data center, sitting in a country, and to a lot of businesses and to a lot of people, that's incredibly important, especially when it comes to data protection, data privacy, data security. There's potential tax and trade issues as well. So it's something, looking at services, you should always be initially very aware of to ensure you are not compromising a client's data by putting it into a region that compromises their own security policy. It affects obviously speed, reliability, redundancy, the cost. In actual fact, if you were wanting to do something quick in the UK, Dublin is actually cheaper on a lot of servers because they've just got loads of capacity and it's going cheap. So it can affect things in unusual ways. Security and compliance, as I said before, and then some of the computing features and the disaster recovery. So the cloud, many services are also multi-region, so you can host things in multiple territories and effectively you take advantage of these ultra-fast pipes between areas and beam them between the two. And finally, the final point really is security. It's not a simple topic, but there's absolutely no, there's no kind of Google aren't as secure as Amazon or anything like that. Ultimately, you're using a PC somewhere else, and it's up to you to make sure that that PC is secure. So it needs to be designed, well implemented, and encrypted, securely authenticated, ideally with various forms of compliance. I'll run through some of these. I'm not going through too many of the details. But an important factor when looking at delivering these services within your building as well is one or many connections. If we took Microsoft Teams rooms or something like that in a building, they'll all individually communicate out. But if you are looking for a higher level of security, now there are a lot of advanced systems, gateways or proprietary PCs which can effectively tunnel your connection to the outside world, create one secure tunnel and make life an awful lot safe and secure, and occasionally with features like 4 or 5G redundancy for remote. So bottom line on cloud security, obviously be diligent and treat it like any other risk. So you have to assess, mitigate it and document it, because ultimately if you sell some management service to a client and there's a data breach, you are just as responsible as the person whose breach has occurred, because so you need to show that you've done your diligence. And also talk to the right people within a customer's organisation early on, because there's no point going very far down the line and then suddenly realising there's something that is an absolute no-go. Obviously, that goes without saying there, aligning with your customer's policy. And with the limited time available, I'm going to click through some of these areas, because I know everyone will be wanting. But I wanted just a last word really on adapting as businesses and as individuals. So some of these large-scale changes can be seen as a concern, but ultimately within our industry, resistance to new technology has always been pretty futile. The most successful businesses have been the ones who've adapted to the demands of the consumer. And it does mean a change to businesses in terms of the products and services they offer, and it's also a challenge for individuals in terms of the skills, training, certification, and everything else. So we need to prepare for these changes effectively. For businesses, there can be some absolutely massive benefits, because we are seeing a move to more operational expenditure, less capital expenditure, which for businesses can mean much better cash flow, a lot less peaky up and down revenue streams, if you are continually billing a client for a service, you're continually in touch with a client for a service. And I think there is a potential tipping point where the greater level of cost is the operational expenditure compared to the capital expenditure, then businesses will just buy, for example, meeting rooms on a monthly basis. I mean, it is possible now, but it's probably not cost effective now. For the individual, I'm using the term here for an AV engineer, but if you look over recent history, some of the things that AV audiovisual engineers have had to deal with, kind of RGB projectors. I remember the first time I ever had to come across S-video and had to learn about bloody chrominance and luminance and confuse the hell out of me the night before having to do something else. Harking as far back as overhead projectors. They're not quite redundant BNC, but we certainly see a lot fewer of them nowadays than we used to. And a funny one I saw the other day, it was almost redundant DVI connector, which we kind of thought was something of the future. And behind the 2CV, the second greatest French invention, which is the SCART connector, which is thankfully no longer. However, again, some things don't stay the same. Still need to securely fix things to the wall, still need to use decent access control, and certain things, loudspeakers are loudspeakers. There's obviously advances in technologies and things like that. However, much of the cabling and technology is the same. I think there's probably, when it comes to audio over video, I think radio became mature before TV became mature, and it's therefore audio industry is a more mature industry. Plus, there's obviously a lot more noughts and ones in 4K 444 videos there is in 44.1K video. But as I said before, no matter what they bring, it won't change the laws of physics, the nature of human perception, and the fact the client will want it cheaper. Whenever it comes to business leaders, salespeople, engineers, programmers, ultimately, my personal opinion is if we don't adapt to deliver some of these services, and they're services that our clients want, it's where IT resellers, direct sales organisations, it's where organisations will jump in and threaten our business and our livelihoods. Therefore, I think it's really important for us to adapt and grow and change. An understanding of local area networks is arguably probably one of the most important elements, so networking know-how. Being conscious of security, it's an absolute vital element to any business now. Information security and network security, IoT capable, being aware of IoT areas. When I say cloud savvy, just having a general awareness of cloud servers, because they're increasingly becoming important, where a Crestron programmer 5 years ago would have rarely had to deal with anything more than a device in their own room, but nowadays they're probably having to communicate a REST API to some cloud service to get additional information for the integrations. Being aware of standards, so obviously standards we know of, sort of Dante and H.264, but also things like MQTT, IoT protocols and areas such as that. And having a good knowledge of operating systems. There's so many devices now are just Android Business or Windows IoT that I think it's a vital area to have an understanding of what they give. So I think just as a final word, keep it pretty much within time. We as an industry understand so much. We understand sound, light, architecture, ergonomics, acoustics, cables, terminations, types of ceilings, floors, conduits, cable gauges, schematics. We are one of the most varied skill sets of any organisation I think you could imagine, and a pool of great talent. So I think there is every confidence we can move into the future adapting to these challenges, and not only that, I think for us as an industry embracing these challenges, we bring in a whole new range of areas that we can begin to increase our service delivery into, such as room booking is obviously a fairly core topic, but things like workplace wayfinding, virtual receptionists, building IoT management, customer dashboards, and a whole new range of services that we are probably the best placed people to deliver. Just about on time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dan.